Real Madrid may have won 3-0 against Schalke, but the scoreline is not the most interesting part of this game. What really caught my attention was the structure behind the result, because when you watch this Real Madrid under José Mourinho, you start to see a very clear idea. The formation may say 4-2-3-1, but the way they move, the way they build, the way the fullbacks rotate, and the way Bernardo Silva changes the structure, it is much more complex than a simple 4-2-3-1. And in this video, I want to break down exactly how Mourinho's Real Madrid built attacks, how they created overloads, how they pressed Schalke, and most importantly, why players like Kylian Mbappé and Bernardo Silva could become extremely important to this system. Let's start with the build-up. When Real Madrid started the game from the back, the basic structure was a familiar 4-2-3-1. Two center-backs, two midfielders in front of them, full-backs providing width, and three attacking players behind the striker. But there was something much more important happening. The center-backs were responsible for deciding where the next pass would go. Mourinho clearly wanted Real Madrid to use the full-backs as one of the main progression points. The idea was simple: get the ball to the full-back, then use the winger, the number 10, or an inside midfielder around him, and from there, attack the space in front of the defensive line. Mourinho doesn't want the team to spend too much time circulating the ball in the first and second thirds. He wants the ball to reach the final third quickly, and one of the best examples of this came when Real Madrid were building from Courtois. The shape looked like a normal 4-2-3-1, but then Bernardo Silva started to move, and this is where things became really interesting. Schalke were defending Real Madrid with a very clear man-oriented pressing system. That meant their players were not simply protecting spaces. They were following Real Madrid's players and trying to deny them easy passing options. But this is exactly where Bernardo Silva's movement became so important. Look at Bernardo's position. Instead of staying alongside his midfield partner, he drops into the space between Real Madrid's center-back, Ibrahima Konate, and the full-back, Trent Alexander-Arnold. Now, this creates a very difficult decision for Schalke, because if the Schalke player follows Bernardo into that space, he leaves the central area. And if he leaves that central area, Real Madrid can immediately exploit the space that he has abandoned. So Schalke have to make a choice: follow Bernardo and open the middle, or stay in the middle and give Bernardo space. They choose the second option, and that is exactly what Bernardo wants, because the moment Schalke decide not to follow him, Bernardo has successfully escaped the man-oriented marking. He has found a pocket of space between the lines, and now he is facing the game instead of having a defender directly on his back. But there is another important detail here. Bernardo is not simply finding space, he is creating it. His movement pulls Schalke's defensive structure apart, because they have to respect the possibility of following him, while at the same time protecting the central lane. And because Real Madrid were being defended man-to-man, every movement had a consequence. One player moves, another player has to decide whether to follow, and that decision creates the next passing option. That is exactly how Bernardo was able to receive the ball. Once he gets it, he doesn't need to carry the ball for 20 meters. He simply turns, connects with the next player, and suddenly Real Madrid have broken Schalke's first line. And this is what makes Bernardo so valuable in Mourinho's system. He doesn't need a lot of space, he only needs the right space. His movement creates the separation, and his first touch allows Real Madrid to exploit it immediately. In one sequence, Real Madrid went from their defensive third to the final third with just 3 passes, and that sequence perfectly explains Mourinho's idea. The objective isn't to keep the ball for the sake of possession. It is to use movement to manipulate the opponent, create the free player, and then attack the space immediately. Schalke were trying to mark Real Madrid's players. Bernardo was using their marking system against them. Once Real Madrid moved beyond the first phase of the build-up, the structure started to change, and this is probably one of the most interesting tactical details from the game. Real Madrid could transform into a 3-1 structure. One of the two pivots would drop between or alongside the center backs. The other midfielder would remain higher. At the same time, the fullbacks would have different responsibilities. One could push high and provide width. The other could move inside and become an inverted fullback. And this is where the rotations become important, because Mourinho wasn't simply telling players to move randomly. The movements were connected. If one player moved inside, somebody else had to occupy the width. If the fullback moved inside, the winger had to stay wide. If the winger moved inside, another player had to provide the outside lane. This is positional play, and we can see it clearly on the left side. Look at Alvaro Carreras. When the ball is progressing on his side, Carreras can move inside, but there is an important condition. He doesn't simply move inside because he wants to. The movement is triggered by the position of the ball and the positioning of the players around him. When Carreras moves inside, Vinicius Jr. stays wide. That immediately creates a problem for Schalke, because now Schalke have to decide, do they follow Carreras inside, or do they stay with Vinicius? If the defender follows Carreras, space opens for Vinicius. If the defender stays with Vinicius, Carreras becomes available inside, and this is how Real Madrid create an overload. But there is another layer. The overload is not only designed to create a free player, it can also create a third-man combination, and this is something we saw several times. For example, Huijsen can play into Mbappe. Mbappe then interacts with Carreras. Carreras becomes the next player in the combination, and the intention is to use one-touch or quick combinations to break the defensive line. In one sequence, Carreras could have found Arda Güler attacking the next space. Instead, the ball went back toward Vinicius, who had maintained his position on the touchline. And from there, Real Madrid could switch the ball toward Trent Alexander-Arnold. The important thing is not the final pass. The important thing is the structure that created the possibility. And what makes this even more interesting is that we see similar principles in the move that eventually produces Carlos Espí's goal. When Camavinga drops into the center-back line, Carreras becomes the inverted fullback. Vinicius stays wide. Trent stays wide on the opposite side. Brahim Diaz occupies the number 10 area. And suddenly, Real Madrid have players occupying almost every important vertical lane. This gives the center-backs multiple passing options. They can play wide, they can play inside, they can find the winger, or they can find the fullback. Look at Huijsen. He has the ability to play directly toward Vinicius. And because Vinicius is holding the width, Carreras can attack the inside space. The defensive line is constantly being asked to make decisions. And that is the real purpose of the rotations. Not movement for the sake of movement, but movement designed to manipulate defenders. Now let's move to the defensive side. Without the ball, Real Madrid returned to their basic 4-2-3-1. The objective was very clear. Protect the central areas. Mourinho didn't want Schalke to comfortably play through the middle. Instead, Real Madrid tried to force the ball into areas where they could press aggressively, and this is where their attacking talent becomes useful defensively. Because when you have players with the speed of Mbappe, Vinicius, and the technical quality of Güler and Bernardo, you don't necessarily need to dominate possession to control the game. You can win the ball and attack immediately, and we saw this in the build-up to the first goal. When Schalke tried to build from the back, Real Madrid used a very aggressive man-oriented press. Several Madrid players were directly connected to Schalke players. The two wingers were involved. The number 10 stepped up. Mbappe pressed from the front. And one of the pivots also moved forward. But there was one important adjustment. The two pivots did not simply push forward together. One stayed deeper. And this is extremely important, because one of the problems a team can have when pressing with a double pivot is the space left behind the midfield line. If both midfielders jump forward, the opponent can play through the space behind them. Mourinho's solution is simple. One pivot goes, one stays. And this is one reason Federico Valverde's positioning becomes so important. He provides security behind the press, so Real Madrid can attack the ball aggressively without completely destroying their rest defense structure. This is a very Mourinho-like principle. Aggression with protection behind it. Now we have to talk about Kylian Mbappé, because one of the biggest misconceptions is that Mbappe's greatest value comes from staying inside the penalty box. I don't think that is where Mourinho will want to use him all the time. Mbappe's biggest weapon is his ability to attack space, especially the space between the center back and fullback. And against a high defensive line, that becomes extremely dangerous. Watch this sequence. Real Madrid win the ball. 3 passes later, Mbappé is already attacking the space behind Schalke. That is not a coincidence. The center back has the ability to play toward the fullback. The fullback can find the winger, and Mbappé can then attack the space created by the movement. This is where Mourinho can get maximum value from him. Mbappé doesn't need 10 touches. He doesn't need to receive the ball with his back to goal for long periods. He needs space. Give him 5 meters, and he can turn 5 meters into 30. Another interesting detail was what happened when Real Madrid had the ball deeper in their own half. Mbappé would sometimes move toward the flank, and when he moved outside, Brahim Diaz could move inside. This creates another positional rotation. Mbappé attracts the defender toward the wing. Brahim attacks the inside space, and suddenly Real Madrid have another player between the lines. This is why the 4-2-3-1 shouldn't be understood as 4 defenders, 2 midfielders, 3 attackers, and 1 striker standing in fixed positions. The formation is only the starting reference. The actual structure changes according to the ball, the opponent, and the movement of the players. And finally, we have Bernardo Silva. Most people will look at Bernardo and immediately think about his technical quality, his passing, his ability to keep possession, his creativity. But there is another part of his game that could be extremely valuable for Mourinho: his defensive intelligence. When the ball is on Bernardo's side, he is very aware of the space around him. He can close the central lane, he can support the full back, and he can understand when he needs to press and when he needs to protect. Look at this situation. Bernardo is tracking his player. At the same time, Trent Alexander-Arnold has moved higher. That movement creates space behind Trent. Bernardo recognizes both situations almost instantly. He doesn't simply follow his man. He uses his awareness of space to protect 2 problems at the same time, and this is what makes him so interesting interesting. He can connect the player and the space. This also explains why Real Madrid can move between two different defensive structures. The first is the 4-2-3-1. Bernardo can drop deeper to close the half space or support Trent, but when Real Madrid push higher, the structure can become closer to a 4-1-4-1. Bernardo moves higher, the midfield line becomes more aggressive, and the striker starts to press the center backs. So Bernardo is not simply playing one position. He is helping Real Madrid transition between different defensive shapes, and this is perhaps one of the biggest reasons Mourinho wanted a player like him. Bernardo himself has said that he is comfortable playing in different positions and wants to adapt to what the team needs. That versatility fits perfectly into a system based on rotations. So what did Real Madrid's 3-0 victory over Schalke actually tell us? For me, the biggest takeaway is not the scoreline, it is the structure. We saw a Real Madrid that starts in a 4-2-3-1, but can transform into a 3-1 structure in possession. We saw fullbacks moving inside, wingers maintaining width, number 10s occupying the half spaces, third-man combinations, and center-backs constantly looking for the next progressive pass. Without the ball, we saw a more aggressive 4-2-3-1, a man-oriented press, protection from the double pivot, and a clear attempt to control the central areas. But perhaps the most interesting part is the combination of these ideas with the players Mourinho now has. Mbappe gives him devastating depth, Vinicius gives him width and isolation, Güler gives him creativity between the lines, and Bernardo Silva gives him something different, a player capable of connecting the different phases of the game. The important question now is not whether Real Madrid can beat Schalke 3-0. They can. The real question is whether these structures can survive when the opposition is stronger, more compact, and better at pressing. Because against Schalke, Mourinho gave us a glimpse of what this Real Madrid could become. And if these positional rotations continue to develop, then the most dangerous thing about Mourinho's new Real Madrid may not simply be the players they have. It may be the structure that allows all of those players to become dangerous at the same time. And that is what makes this team so interesting to watch.